Hi, everybody. This is Deanna Kosaraja with Global Tech Women. Welcome back to Voices 2015, where we're celebrating the accomplishments of women in technology around the world, the week of International Women's Day. So with this session, a very important topic, breaking the code of interview implicit bias to value different gender competencies with Bonita Banducci. So a few things you need to know. We have a chat window here on the right-hand side where you can chat, you can ask questions. You need to be logged into Spreecast in order to do that. So if you're just visiting us and you're not logged into Spreecast, you won't be able to chat with us. However, you can send me a question on Twitter or email me at deanna@globaltechwoman.com, and I'll make sure that those questions get sent over to Bonita. Another thing is we have 4 pieces of multimedia that we're going to display. We've got a YouTube video and a couple of other videos and a PowerPoint deck. So when those go up, you will be responsible for playing them. With the PowerPoint, you will be responsible for advancing the slides. So Bonita will let us know what slide number she's on so we can follow along. And we'll cue you, we'll let you know what you need to do when we put that multimedia up. And you hit the play button and then we'll take it down and we'll go through it step by step. It will be self-explanatory once we go through the first one. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bonita, and I'll be here in the background if you need me.
Great. Thank you so much, Deanna. And I do want to say that just so that you know out there that I know the camera's over here and the screen is over here with the chat room over here. So if you see my eyes going back and forth, I'm trying to include everyone and everything. That's how the setup is here. And I welcome you all. Welcome you to Santa Clara. I have been teaching here at Santa Clara University in the graduate engineering program for actually 15 years as a lecturer in gender and engineering. It was in 2000 that the dean of the engineering school had a commitment to, he wanted to teach his engineering students professional skills beyond engineering, and actually was looking for someone who would teach gender communication in the workplace. And fortunately, I was recommended. I'd done some work with the university. And I have had the most fabulous experience teaching students from all over the world. I'm going to have at least one join us today. But you'll be seeing some of the work that they've done out of understanding gender differences in this framework I call gender competence. A little bit more about me. I did my original research with Sun Microsystems in the early 90s, and I don't usually mention companies I work with, but given Sun is now no longer officially a company, I like to acknowledge the courageous men, actually, that had made it possible for us. I was a part of a team of consultants who went into discover what it was. The question that the vice president of one of the divisions raised was, what is the contribution women make that could be the strategic advantage in the global marketplace? And for me to be able to do that research and decipher what it was women were bringing to the workplace, and I'd had my own experience in a career previous to this that had made me very curious about what it was that women bring. And now I've actually framed my work for the most part as bringing out the brilliance of women and the greatness of men, because you will see in what I'm going to be sharing with you today some of the work that some of the men from my class have produced that actually is making a difference in breaking gender bias, implicit gender bias. I want to backtrack a little bit. I'm making an assumption that you all know what I mean by implicit bias, and this is a global conference. I want to make sure that everyone knows that in the United States, it's become quite an important focus in wanting to increase diversity in organizations, not just technical organizations, but all organizations. But this being able to have people be more conscious of the bias that we bring without even being conscious of it. And some people call it unconscious bias, other people call it implicit bias. There's some great online workshops that you can participate in. I know that here in this conference, it was Caroline Simard who did her work yesterday in leadership language that really did do some very wonderful revealing of the biases we all have. And I have found that there's a piece that I have articulated that makes a big difference. And today, I'll give you a little introduction to it in general. This is what I call gender competence. But specifically, we're going to focus on the difference it makes in the interviewing situation. Now, so Deanna, if you want to bring up the PowerPoint now, we can start paging through, and I'll remind you again that each one of you is responsible for going through, and I will make every effort to tell you what number of PowerPoint I'm on. Some of them might have a couple of different strokes that you need to make to get through. They might be multi-layered, but we'll see as we go in this process of the Spreecast. So let me just give you a brief introduction to what I'm calling gender competence. This is actually slide 2 that I'm on. And let me move forward one more to slide 3. Well, actually, this is the interview process, the difference in relationships. But so let me cover this, and I'll get to the gender competence piece itself. In interview relationships, there are usually 3 different kinds of relationships. There's how the interviewer calls out her own brilliance. I know that there was a session earlier in the conference about the brilliance, bringing out the brilliance of women, having a lot to do with being able to manage your interior conversations, your sense of confidence. And what you'll be hearing today is more on how to actually frame the different competencies that women do bring to the workplace that we often don't name. And I have found that most women think the way they think is common sense when it's really important to articulate it. So that's what I mean in terms of the interview, the person being interviewed actually bringing out those different competencies. The second relationship is the interviewee relating to the interviewer. The third relationship is the interviewer relating to the interviewee. And we'll be covering all of those in this conversation, where, as I mentioned before, even as someone who's being interviewed, I may have my own bias thinking, well, this is just common sense. It's not something that I need to mention or that I need to say. It's pretty obvious what I do and what I've achieved. I appreciate Karen's still here in the room from the previous session, and she pointed out that in the research she's done, that the visibility of what particularly women have accomplished is one of the key factors in supporting their development of their careers. So we're going to add a piece to that as well. Okay, now I'm going to step forward a little bit here. And hi, Michael, thanks for coming in. As I said, my first emphasis has always been calling out the brilliance of women. What I want to share with you, for instance, from my early research at Sun Microsystems, interviewing Carol Bartz when she was second in command at Sun Microsystems, was the big aha for me, because I asked her what it was that she brought to the executive team that wouldn't be there otherwise. And she said that she brought an ability to see all the different ramifications of a given issue, that for the most part, the men mostly wanted to prioritize what's the most important problem, what's the most important solution, put the solution against the problem and fight any fires that happen. She liked to prevent fires. So she liked to see, looking into all the different areas that might have an impact on the problem. She would bring a more, what I call, systems way of thinking, or connecting the dots. And I thought this was fabulous, and realized that this is something that is invisible and unarticulated and often undervalued. Then she added, for this, she's considered to be not a team player. And I realized, oh, it's not just that it's invisible, but it's often misinterpreted and actually seen as counterproductive or ultimately incompetent. So that was where I set forth on really articulating the difference in the way of competencies. You will, I'm sure many of you know that it's familiar to you that many researchers, most recently, particularly all the work that's been done on the Athena doctrine, most researchers, first of all, talk about the difference between masculine and feminine. And I stay away from that because I will be introducing to you some new alternatives as well to looking at where these differences come from. They're not new, but we're identifying that there are a number of different influences. That gender is a very strong one in seeing the world through a lens of relationship or seeing the world through a lens of independence. And I call them the relational lens and the individualistic lens, rather than putting them into masculine and feminine, because there is a need for everyone to be able to identify themselves, for themselves, and amongst everyone when these competencies are actually available and adding value. In any case, the next step I want to take on this, let me just go to the next slide. Oops, let's see, that skipped according to my, hold on, mine skipped a few. So I'm going to go back. I don't know how that happened. This is what should be slide 5. Okay, now I'm learning a few things. The added value of differences, the differences come both at the perception and the perspective level, the thinking, the decision making, problem solving. What I call customer focus is part of the thinking, which is getting into the customer's shoes and looking from there. Communication, behaviors, and ultimately what we can call competencies. I just like to cover, I think many people have mentioned during the conference, that there's the new added value that's been identified in research. This is my grand finale slide usually, but one of the things I learned is that often more relational people want to save something for the grand finale when we need to bring it up front and make the point up front, especially for the more individualistic people. So I want to make the point that there's a whole new world of innovation, productivity, as well as promotability of men and women by this conversation. And that's why we want to be interviewing for the differences, not just having everyone have an equal sort of standard to be measured by in the interview process. Now, what I wanted to also relate this to is the research that's being done today. Catalyst reports having 3 or more women on a board actually has these incredible results compared to companies that don't have at least 3 women on their boards. And McKinsey has also reported these results. Another cut on this in terms of the value of adding differences has been the research on collective intelligence. that where this is Carnegie Mellon and MIT, where they found that there's a higher collective intelligence or a higher IQ for what a group can produce in the way of complex problem solving when there are more women in the group. And they were really surprised to find this. They weren't looking for it. What kind of amuses me, I think it's typical, of course, that the research that we have shows that that women, well, it's very obvious in the videos they took in the research that women were taking turns. And the other thing is that women have a social sensitivity, they call it, an ability to read people's faces. So I want to give you a quick sample of that in case you haven't done the implicit bias tests or this is actually called the reading the mind and the eyes test about differences. So I just want to take a moment. This gives you the experience of how you may actually have an ability that other people on your team may not have, and why some women on for instance, a sales team might be able to see what's going on with a customer that other people don't notice. Now, in this picture, which would best describe what the person in the picture is thinking or feeling? Amused, relaxed, joking, insisting. This is one of the harder ones. You can do it. This is a long test with lots of them. So, what's your guess? Okay. All right, here it comes. Insisting. So, I wish I had a way of finding out how many of you were right on this. In any case, you can Google this test and take the whole thing and get your score on it. Generally, it's been found that women have a better ability to read the emotions on the face. Now, my point here is that this is some of the research we have, and that's what's being applied to why women are more effective in groups. But what I'm going to be talking about today are some other competencies that I think are also relevant. Other than qualitative data, I haven't had the opportunity to do the research on it statistically. But these are all things that I think need to be allowed for when you're interviewing and understanding who you're qualifying for candidates. So let's move on to the next slide. Because this again is what I mentioned earlier, that new research done by Rose Marcus and Alana Connor at Stanford shows that this lens that I was talking about, I was using the words individualistic and relational, and I use those lenses because they're considered to be cultural lenses. That there are a number of different influences for what may have someone have a more individualistic or independent lens, or relational or interdependent lens. And you can see here there's the east-west hemisphere, gender, ethnicity. It's hard for me to read from here, but college, religion, U.S. Region, workplace, and global region are all influences. And in their book, they actually score a few people. Like Obama gets 6 in each column. And they also score Mother Teresa and Bill Gates. And you can imagine how their scores are scored. Now, this isn't scientific, but it's a way of being able to appreciate how different backgrounds can actually cultivate different ways of thinking. And again, they haven't. I'm talking to them about possibly doing some research with them, because they had not taken it to the extent of naming the competencies as I have. But again, I want to acknowledge all the different influences. But it's very important in terms of gender. And I also want to acknowledge here, this is, excuse me, the next slide, which is slide 12. I'm getting some help here from Karen, thank you. Again, I want you to see this as a picture, not of all men are one way and all women are another way. And now we've already discussed the other influences. But still, there is a significant trend, a significant number of women that are often very relational, or relational in what I call ambidextrous, or can be called bridge brain, that would have their skills and their abilities and what they produce be misinterpreted by more individualistic people, and yet at the same time seen for themselves as being common sense. One of my favorite distinctions, I'll start giving a few of them to you. I already said that Carol Barth saw herself as more of a systems thinker. She actually said that she saw herself as a fire preventer rather than a firefighter. And this, I think, is a really important distinction. We all know that we see firefighters as leaders and as with high competence, whereas how often have we identified fire preventers? How many of you can see yourself as fire preventers? In fact, I was on a panel at Intuit a few weeks ago, and after talking about firefighters and fire preventers, one of the women came up to me and said, "No, Bonita, just this week, my boss said to me that I don't hear anything about your project." And she said, "Now I know I need to go back to him and tell him I'm a fire preventer." And we talked about how she needs to also show what she's done to prevent those fires, because otherwise it doesn't show up. And this is what we were, talking about earlier about the importance of showing up. Now, again, it's probably common sense that you would prevent fires, but you have to realize you're in a culture where that is not, it's not even spoken about. And this is where my passion is to start bringing these competencies into the workplace so that they can be valued and rewarded and worked with effectively. It's been really rewarding to see both the men and women working effectively with these differences as a result of my class. So, and I do want to say that some women have used the expression they like to run a smooth ship. That's another way of being a fire preventer. And I've had some women tell me, and more than one, that they've been told if they want to get ahead, they should light a few fires and put them out. And they don't want to light fires. So this is the way, we need to start identifying what it is about being a fire preventer. Now, there are a number of things related to being a fire preventer, like that systems way of thinking and being able to point out that you're a systems thinker. And remember, let's see, I know I want to go to another slide or two here. I guess I better be a little linear here. Well, let me finish the story then about the systems thinker and being able to articulate these things. Let's see if I wanted to. Well, for instance, I'll get to a slide that's going to show that often the relational person likes to give a very broad story and a big picture, connecting all the dots. And for someone who's very focused and much more of a linear thinker, they can get lost in that and actually interpret that communication as being scattered and all over the place. So being able to identify first that you need to come to the point, get to the point directly, and then also identify how there's a value in being able to see all these other interconnected things, allows the more individualistic person to follow you. And I call that adopting. Adopting to the other language, so that you are being able to communicate your different ideas into their language. However, there's also adapting. And that's what I meant by telling people ahead of time, you can count on me as a firefighter. One of the things I do, as a fire preventer, one of the things I do is I look at all the different ramifications of a given issue, which might look unfocused to you, but it's purposeful and it has an impact and it brings results. So this is, and then when you are doing that kind of thing, you can point that out. So this is a process of adapting and adopting. Now I'm going to get back to what that looks like for interviewing in just a couple minutes. One other thing I wanted to bring in terms of international cultures. Let's go one more slide. Slide 13 is that the prevailing culture of a country can also color and influence, the degree to which you're individualistic, the degree to which you're relational. And that, I think that's conveyed in what we talked about earlier in the culture clash slide of the different influences. But I also want to acknowledge this. I know I had one situation, one example, particularly that lives with me, because I often introduce the difference between playing devil's advocate and playing angel's advocate in the environment, in the work environment. That devil's advocate is prevalent and is more deductive thinking, whereas angel's advocate is building an idea and is more inductive thinking. And I remember having a woman from India tell me that she had been ready to quit her job until she saw the exercise that I had about devil's advocate and angel's advocate. She was sure that her boss thought she was stupid because her boss was always playing devil's advocate with her. And the underlying message was, it's not a good idea. He was always poking holes, saying where the weaknesses were, etc. Now, so she was ready to quit her job. When she saw this, she was able to turn that around completely. A slight difference was a woman from the United States in a biotech firm who told me that she had recently played devil's advocate with her boss over an idea she proposed, and she took the message from her boss as it was not a good idea, and she dropped the idea. And 3 weeks later, he came back and said, "Oh, how's your project coming along?" And she had, just assumed it wasn't a good idea. I'm just drawing the parallel that perhaps being in a more collectivist culture, a more relational, prevailing culture, might have a greater impact. And I think that follows through again with the other research that has been done. So these are the kinds of things that in your own interview you can be aware of in terms of wanting to be able to articulate, wanting to be able to frame as a strength that you're an inductive thinker, that you like to build ideas, that you're a fire preventer, a systems thinker. Or you may want to shape your conversation around, well, I won't say or, and according to the interviewer, you may want to shape your conversation to the interviewer. So let's move forward with this to the next slide, which will be slide 14. Because one of the methods to overcome unconscious bias that's been suggested, by the way, there's a typo in this. It's Dr. Brian Well at the bottom. He's the director of people analytics at Google. This was in his webinar. You can catch this on YouTube, the unconscious bias workshop that he's done. One of the suggestions he suggests for overcoming unconscious bias is identify skills and characteristics of successful people now on the job as a standard for new hires. Now that sounds pretty logical, but then again, if you're only using the people already on the job, how are you going to bring in diverse thinkers? And that's why, again, I want to advocate for more of a training and understanding of these gender competencies. I started here because it's gender competencies, but they're also cultural competencies in terms of being shaped by. I want to keep reinforcing that. And then he suggests creating a rubric for evaluating answers to the questions from good to bad. So that's where, again, we want to look at what are we measuring? Are we excluding diversity in this? Now, he has a lot of other great suggestions, so this is not his only suggestion. So I recommend that you check that out. But again, this is why I wanted to emphasize the importance of looking for difference and how to encourage difference. Let's see, one more slide. Let's go to slide 15. This was also part of his presentation. Look at the words that are often used to describe the differences between men and women. And particularly, this was the study having to do with what makes a good manager. Many more words having to do with what makes a good manager, 71%, have to do with what's associated with men, whereas only 10% are associated with women. Then associated with this was the research that was brought out yesterday in Caroline Simard's workshop or session here on leadership language. She talked about the difference between communal language and agentic language. Communal being, she used the example, supportive, team player, helpful. This is in describing people that you may want to acknowledge either in performance reviews or in evaluations, that often the communal language is used for women, whereas the agentic language is used for men, and how we need to be able to use more of the agentic language, which has to do with action and producing results, rather than personality and how we get along with people. Again, this is all important work that you should watch the whole segment that she did. But she pointed out that often women are described as supportive, team player, helpful, friendly, thoughtful, collaborative, committed, caring, tactical, which I also consider to be process-oriented, how we do things rather than strategic. But so I just want to point that out. But other two words, hardworking and relationship builder. Whereas the agentic, having to do with the more action and producing results, that is often used for men, is confident, strategic, ambitious, outspoken, independent, risk taker, entrepreneurial, driver, influential, go-getter, and innovator. I started to smile here too as I was reading risk taker, because one of my colleagues has pointed out to me she sees herself definitely. She's from Australia. Her name is Gemma Green. Thank you. She is going to be running for mayor of Perth and eventually intends to be the Prime Minister of Australia. So we had a great conversation about these competencies. And she said that she's really great at risk management and risk assessment. That she likes those words for being a fire preventer. So I like to put that in as well, as I spontaneously think of associations, which us relational people do. Some people might be thinking, oh, she's going off the track. And I am to some extent. And sometimes I have to mitigate that. But on the other hand, I want to acknowledge that it's enjoyable, especially bring in these wonderful stories in my mind. Okay, so again, I want to acknowledge this is Brian Well from Google, and again, it's Caroline Simard from Stanford that are working with these, the language of how we describe men and women. And what I found to be gender competence is new language. Again, let's move on to slide, let me come around here, to slide 16. And I dared to put these fun images in here. I don't want to imply that individualistic is the devil, but this is symbolizing the difference between devil's advocate and what I call angel's advocate. I mentioned this before, between the deductive reasoning and the inductive reasoning, which I have found really drives people out of the engineering workplace, particularly relational people. It's not just for relational people, but the experience of always having to face a firing squad when you propose an idea is not conducive to really enjoying the workplace. And yet, we don't normally have a word for identifying what, well, we often call it collaborative, but I've found that I have found people that consider devil's advocate to be another kind of collaboration. So that's why the inductive reasoning, you can use angel's advocate, you can use building a case, but keeping in mind that this is building an idea rather than trying to poke holes in it and bulletproofing, which has its value, but not when it's killing off people. You need to be able to contextualize it, say, look, I want to bulletproof this, and even teach it to someone who might take it personally as saying that it's a bad idea and that they aren't competent. But I am an advocate in this adapting and adopting that I've told you before, of having relational people say, look, hold on, Gary, we'll play devil's advocate. I'll play devil's advocate with you, but first I want to play angel's advocate. I'm more creative, being able to think through building an idea, and I want your best thinking on this idea before we do devil's advocate. That kind of adapting and adopting. You're actually teaching a skill to the other. Now, I'm going to do a time check here. I want to move on because we have a couple of great videos to show, but these, you can see some of the things that I've already mentioned, the difference between the customer focus of the more individualistic, is I know what's best for the customer, which is very different. It's valuable, but it's different than I get into the customer's shoes and look from there. So let's move on. I think it's how does this show up? I mentioned before, in terms of this is slide 17, the difference between a more high context way of seeing things and a more focused way of seeing things. Joe Bowler at Stanford has also identified women in math, that often women, it's not that they don't like math, they just want a higher understanding of math to really enjoy it, rather than just give me a formula and have me work with it. And I think that's really an interesting difference in competency and understanding that this higher standard for understanding, not just for math, but for other things. I'm going to start cutting to the chase here because we don't have much more time. So basically, this is also a slide 18, that distinguishes the individualistic and the relational in cross-cultural terms. How we use information, how we relate to others, how we relate to time. You know, web thinking versus linear or step thinking is one piece that I put in. Now, what I want to do is, this is the end. This is my contact information, but we can put down the PowerPoint for now. And let me do just a basic introduction to these videos that we're going to do. And I've been joined by one of my students here in the room. I want him to be able to put his opinion in all this too, his experience. But basically, first of all, I want to introduce to you Robert's interview. We'll be seeing that in a moment. Robert was one of my students who decided to use understanding these differences in his own interview at Cisco, and it's pretty self-explanatory. I do want you to acknowledge that it was also another student who turned his paper into this wonderful cartoon. Uh, um, so this is a joint effort. And then we'll be seeing a different version as well, a different cut on interviews. There are two different versions. First, Robert's interview with Wendy, who is a woman who he interprets as being a relational person, and then with Daryl. So, Deanna, do you want to put the first one up? Is that and direct us as how we should do this?
Okay, everyone.
We should run this ourselves.
Yes, everyone should click the play button.
I'm going to run it.
Okay.
I'm going to start mine, and we should end up at about the same time.
Right.
Now, okay. Now I'm not getting any sound. Oh, bring the sound up at the speaker if you don't have it.
Hey, Roberta.
Okay, now before we run the second one, isn't that great? Did you enjoy that? I do want to also point out in this interview, or in this video, Robert was referring to unmasking the gender effect, which is what I originally called my work. I decided to start shifting to gender competence because I wanted to frame everything as competency. I told you about that earlier. but specifically I wanted to add because in the world of skills and objects and results, that competencies are what can be used, whereas traits and styles, the more individualistic people don't know how to use them. So if I didn't cover that earlier, I wanted to make sure that I did. Now let's see the next step in Robert's interview. Deanna, would you put on the second one? Okay, I'm going to run it, and you all can run yours. So that's our first round of using gender competence, and this has been actually Cisco reorganized, right after this interview. So he didn't get the job at Cisco, but his next interview he did the same thing with another company, and he got the job. And I've had a number of students who have used this as a model, both men and women, to be more effective in their interviews. Now the next one, the next video is both before and after combination of being the interviewer and the kinds of assumptions and implicit bias an interviewer would have in interviewing, in this case, a woman. The difference it makes after having gender competence, learning about it. And you'll see the fellow I'm going to call Gary in the background, who's going to give you the thoughts of the interviewer, is actually the fellow who found it. They were all from my class. They're going to be enacting this. But it was Gary who found himself interviewing a woman for his company with a brilliant resume, and yet she didn't convey confidence. There was something about her that she just wasn't living up to the resume, but he realized that he could draw her out and using the understanding that he gotten from the class. So, and I think it's fabulous. So, of course, and this is an example of these great students that I have and how they use what they learn. So let's roll it. I know we're running out of time, and I want to have a chance for Pranesh here to be able to talk too. Okay, so start it up. and she's actually been hired. And Gary is really excited about, I wouldn't say he's excited, he has a sense of accomplishment that she is going to be in his group, that he advocated to his boss to hire this woman out of his being able to understand and draw her out, and that he'll be able to work effectively with her. Now, I know I'm almost out of time, so I want to take a moment and introduce Panesh Kumar. Come on over. Let's just move into the screen, because he is also have been one of my students. A lot of my students are in finals, and he came over to be part of this webinar today. So, you want to say anything? What would you like to say about your experience with the class?
Hi everyone. Actually, this has been a wonderful class for everyone, like what to do to prepare in a class. Because as an engineer, I think this class is both beneficial for me in my professional life as well as my personal life. Because I have learned a lot of things in the class, that being a relational person is something that is very important for a person to for a win-win situation. And and also, before I used to be like fire maker, and after taking this course, like now I'm trying in every situation, I'm trying to be fire extinguisher, fire stopper.
That's great. That's great. Great.
So it's what, like, and I also think that this course is very useful for the person, like, because as an electrical engineer, this what courses I'm taking is just for get a job and make money for the living. But this course is something that is important, that teaches how to live your life. And because every day you meet different people and different cultures, people from different cultures and different regions. So what we have to learn is how to mingle with them and how to make relations with them. So this is the course that teaches us how that happens, how we have to. If you're not good at making relations, you have to take this course.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I don't know what happened with the broadcast. We may still be on. We may have been cut off. But Deanna, if you're still there, thank you so much. And I'll look
I'm
forward
here.
to. Okay, great. Are we still on camera?
We are, but I need to go because we need to start the next
Okay,
session.
well, thank you. I'm glad that you were able to capture Pranesh's statement. So thank you so much, Deanna, and everyone.
All right, thanks everybody, and we hope to see you at the next session, which is Speak Out and Change the World. It's going to be fabulous. So we'll meet you over in the other link right now. We're going to start in 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.